GRE versus SAT. If you're preparing to apply for grad school and find yourself yet again facing another standardized test, you might be wondering just how different or alike the SAT and GRE are. Before we get into the differences and similarities, be sure to leave a like if you find this video helpful, and subscribe to our channel for more GRE test-taking tips. I'll point out any similarities along the way as well. Hint, there aren't too many. 1. Purpose. One of the major and perhaps most obvious ways that the GRE and SAT are different is the purpose of each exam. The purpose of the SAT is to evaluate a high schooler's aptitude for college, while the GRE is used primarily by graduate schools of applied science, business, and sometimes law as an entrance exam that measures one's abstract thinking. 2. Sections. Despite the fact that both the SAT and GRE are designed to measure your math, vocabulary, reading comprehension, and writing skills, the GRE and SAT individual sections vary greatly. The GRE test content consists of 3 topics: analytical writing, verbal reasoning, and quantitative reasoning. There are 6 sections on the test. 1 section of analytical writing with 2 separately timed tasks, 30 minutes per task. 2 30-minute verbal reasoning sections with 20 questions each. 2 35-minute quantitative reasoning sections with 20 questions each. 1 30 to 35-minute experimental section or research section in verbal or quantitative reasoning with 20 questions each. Test takers get either the research section or the experimental section, but not both. The experimental section is unmarked and random. On the flip side, if there is a research section instead, it will be presented as the last section of your test. It will be identified, and it will be optional. Because there is 1 unscored section on the test, either experimental or research, only 5 of the 6 sections will actually count towards your final score. On the other hand, the SAT includes 2 main topics: evidence-based reading and writing, and math. This breaks down into 4 sections: 1 65-minute reading section, 1 35-minute writing section, 2 math sections, 1 25-minute section, no calculator, and 1 55-minute section, calculator allowed. Content of the sections. In comparison to the SAT, the GRE will have some familiar, albeit often more difficult questions. Like the SAT's evidence-based reading and writing section, the verbal reasoning sections on the GRE will test your comprehension and reasoning skills. However, unlike the SAT, the GRE doesn't have a section dedicated to the actual mechanics of writing. Example, grammar and punctuation. Instead, the GRE tests your ability to establish a coherent, logical argument. In general, the GRE quantitative reasoning sections and SAT math sections test on the same topics. Except the GRE tests more basic math concepts and has a heavier focus on geometry than the SAT. Another difference is that as a computerized test, for the SAT, which is currently delivered on paper until the digital SAT is fully implemented, test takers have a physical calculator that can only be used on the section that allows calculator use. Since the SAT essay is no longer widely offered, the GRE analytical writing is another difference between GRE and SAT. The analytical writing section on the GRE does not test your knowledge of specific content. Rather, it tests your ability to articulate and support complex ideas, develop and evaluate arguments, and sustain a focused and logical discussion. 3. Duration. Another difference between SAT and GRE is the duration. In total, the GRE takes approximately 3 hours and 45 minutes. The SAT is slightly shorter with a duration of approximately 3 hours. 4. Order. On the GRE, the analytical writing section always comes first. However, the remaining sections can appear in any order. An unscored experimental or research verbal or quantitative reasoning section may also be included. Unlike the GRE, the SAT sections always appear in the same order. Occasionally, there is a 20-minute experimental section delivered to randomly selected groups of students who take the SAT. These questions appear as the 5th section on the test, just after the calculator math section. 5. Scoring. Finally, the GRE and SAT are scored using completely different scales. Both the GRE verbal and quantitative reasoning sections use the same scale of 130, lowest score, to 170, highest score, in 1-point increments. It is more common to present each section score separately rather than aggregating both scores together for a combined score. The analytical writing section from 0 to 6 in half-point increments. On the SAT, each section is scored using a scale of 200, lowest score, to 800, highest score. The math and evidence-based reading and writing scores are combined to produce a total SAT score on a scale of 400 to 1600 in 10-point increments. Digital versus paper format. As a computerized test, the GRE uses adaptive testing, which allows the computer to select the difficulty of sections for test takers based on their performance on the prior section. Within each section, all questions contribute equally to the final score. Right now, the SAT is disseminated as a paper test, so adaptive testing isn't an option. However, that will change with the digital SAT. Despite the differences in the scoring between GRE and SAT, there are a few commonalities in scoring. To determine the section scores for both tests, the raw score for each section is calculated based on the number of questions correctly answered. Then the raw scores are converted to the respective scaled scores, which adjust for variations in test difficulty. Also, neither test penalizes you for guessing. So, is the GRE harder than the SAT? Realistically, there is no one correct answer to this question. That said, the general consensus is that the GRE is overall more difficult than the SAT. Although the math on the GRE is generally lower level compared to the math found on the SAT. Some students taking the GRE may be far removed from certain math concepts. Also, the math on the GRE can often be a bit trickier than the math on the SAT, with trap answers and convoluted wording that requires a high level of reasoning and logic to decipher. Additionally, the GRE uses more difficult, often obscure vocabulary and verbose passages that can be intimidating, even for the most English fluent students. Lastly, the unpredictability of the GRE sections can make it slightly more difficult to prepare for than the SAT, which has sections in the same order every time. While there are some similarities between the GRE and SAT, the tests are still fairly different in purpose, sections, duration, order, scoring, format for now. That said, it is common for people to find all standardized tests intimidating. But the ghost of SAT past doesn't have to haunt your future GRE experience. The best way to overcome the test day jitters is to arm yourself with all of the tools you need to be successful. Magoosh offers a wealth of resources to prepare you for test day. Use these resources to prepare so that you know exactly what to expect on test day.